Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. I currently have a few projects working in the shop, but today this is the one I'm working on, so let me catch you up. So recently one of the forum members had posted a picture of his project on the forums, and just like you all do, I'm always looking in the background for little tidbits. And he had some shop stools out there that really caught my eye, and I am in desperate need of some new shop stools. So I inquired about it, and he turned me on to a fairly old version of Shop Notes, and their stool just looked really cool. So I went ahead and I bought the plans. However, I go far afield from their plans. In fact, there's very few things that I do the same in their plans, but ultimately in the end, it comes out looking very similar. So I think it's only appropriate that I point out where the inspiration came from. So we're going to start, actually not with what's in front of me, but we'll get there. We're going to start over at the lathe with the seats themselves. And that's the first deviation from their plans, and that theirs were not turned at the lathe. But I'm going to take the opportunity to play at the lathe. So as usual, when it comes to the lathe, my good friend Richard is going to come over and lend a hand. So I did some pre-planning here and started at the bandsaw and just cut them into rough shape. Now when Richard got here, he started by, of course, turning them to a better shape. Richard's an amazing turner, and I always have fun, and I learn stuff from him in the shop every time he comes. I do not profess to be a turner in any way, shape, or form, so it's always nice to have somebody like Richard around who can come in and teach you a little bit, make you a little better at a skill you're weak at. Now, I've certainly sped this video up quite a bit, and what he's working on here is actually the bottom of the seats, and he's going to create a little recess here so we can get it on the chucks. As well, he's going to widen out a spot for the piano stool hardware that will go in there later. Of course, I stepped in and did all the sanding for him. He's giving me a great lesson. The least I can do is do the sanding for him. But now we flipped it around on the chuck, and he's doing some more shaping, some roundovers on the edges, and then we'll come back in and we will start scooping out the seat section and trying to get rid of those holes from the mounting plate. The seats really did end up with a really nice scoop to them. I was really pleasantly surprised with how they fit the backside. So yeah, just an amazing job. And of course I will step in here again and do all his sanding for him. And I worked through the sanding grits up to about 220 for this, which is plenty good for shop stools. The little dust collector there was not going to keep up with this. That's a Mullet Tools that I have hooked up to my big dust collector, but it's not going to keep up with the lathe. Okay, I wanted to stop here for just a second and talk about mock-ups, and I think they're important. Like I mentioned in the very beginning, I've taken my inspiration from some shop notes, and one of the things that I wasn't a huge fan of in their design, which it was a very cool stool, was the overall width of the base. It was really wide. So I made one that pretty close to their design. I made templates for both of these, and I didn't sand them or clean them up. I just needed some rough ideas, and I slapped it together with plywood, which obviously is not what the final is going to be. And this base, to me, is just too big. So I went and I made a second one and came up with this version, which is just a little bit narrower. Well, it's actually quite a bit narrower at the bottom. And I think that this is the one I'm going to go with. So that's why these mock-ups are important, so we can actually see what that final is going to look like for proportions and things like that. And both of these mock-ups probably took me less than an hour to make. but it gave me a much better visual reference. So with that template, I've got them laid out on here. Next up for me is I'm going to cut all these legs apart before I do the milling, just because it's so much easier to handle the smaller parts. So I laid these all out on that one long board. The downside to doing it this way is I have to break it all apart with the jigsaw. But this was the only board that I had, and I really wanted to conserve material where I could. Most of the rest of the milling process is pretty much the same. I'm still going to flatten the one face here at the joiner. As well, I am going to square up one edge that will eventually have the sliding dovetail that I'm going to use in the block for these stools, which is a little different from the plans, but I think it'll be a good strong joint and work well for this project. Of course, then back over to the planer to get everything flat, but still maybe just a little bit oversized because these are going to sit for a couple of days until I can get back to them. Allows me to joint and flatten one more time. Next up was back to work on the blocks. Over here at the router table, I'm hogging out a bulk of the material to save some wear and tear on the dovetail bit. I've set up a stop block and I'll feed each one in as we go. As well, I'll have to raise this bit a bit and hog out some more material. These are fairly good sized dovetails, so I'll just take a little bit at a time. From there, I loaded up the dovetail bit and without changing the height, and went ahead and started cutting the actual dovetails in the block, shutting it down between each section because I didn't want to pull it back through the block with the blade spinning. And after a little readjustment to the fence, I started running those straight sections of the legs and sneaking up. I test fit in the block and adjust the fence a little bit. It took me a few tries to get these just right, but they did eventually work out just right. And with those fitting correctly, I could go ahead and take these back to the bandsaw and get the rough shapes cut out. I did stay outside the lines, and I will clean them up with sanding and rasps and various hand tools after I get them all cut. For what it's worth, I'm building 2 of these stools at the same time, so these legs, I have 8 of these legs to do. Now, nobody likes to watch a bunch of sanding, but you'll notice that I did gang all these up and shape them all pretty much at the same time, so they came out close to the same. And then it was back to the bandsaw to clip out just the top of the sliding dovetail so that they would fit properly at the top of the block when it was finally assembled. Now I could have reset the fence on the bandsaw and clipped these over there, but frankly I found it just as fast to come over to the bench and do it with a handsaw. With the dry fit looking good, I felt the blocks needed just a little bit of shape to them, so I went ahead and created this little template, and I'll mark these out, and then we'll go over to the bench and start removing material. So I used a power hand planer here to remove a bulk of the material. I'm only making 2 of these, but I think if I were batching out a great number of these, I would probably build some form of a jig for either the bandsaw or the table saw to remove these a little bit quicker. With the bulk of the material removed, I went ahead and switched over to a rasp here just to clean up closer to my lines. And then from there I went to a sander, again just to final shape everything to where I wanted it to be. With the blocks all shaped, I could finally turn my attention back to the legs. I set up a fairly large round over in the router table along with the safety pin and just started shaping the legs there. After all the legs were shaped, I took them over to the bench and used a small block plane and some rasps and sanding just to chamfer the bottom feet so they don't blow out or splinter when you drag them across the shop floor. And then finally we could get on to the glue up. I've been looking forward to this step for quite some time. But the glue up went fairly smooth and no real issues. Get them clamped up and let them sit for the night. So it's actually been a few days since I've worked on this project just because I've been so busy with some client stuff. But I'm finally back to this and on to the brackets. Now, full disclosure, I made a single prototype and I just wasn't happy with the way it turned out. So I reached out to local metal guy M3 Fabrication, if you're in Kalispell, who made these brackets for me. Each one needs a little tweaking, but they're so close that I just set the vise up in here and I'll be able to tweak these without any issues. So that's what we're going to do. I went ahead and marked this first one here, and I'm setting them up for a 5/16 bolt, and we're going to start getting these drilled, and then we'll pull it all back apart and paint it. So it was pretty important to make sure that the holes were in the correct space on both sides of the leg. So I used this woodpecker's drill guide to ensure that that hole was perfectly straight going through the legs. From there, I just set it back up on the bench and installed the hardware for the piano style bench top or seat that goes on here. And then we could finally start looking at doing some finish. The finish of choice on this one is going to be fitties for a couple reasons. One, that's what we used on the seats when we turned them early in this video. And two, I have about, I don't know, a quarter of a can left that I'd like to use up before it goes bad. And shop furniture is just a great place to do that. All right, so there they are, all finished up. Again, shout out to M3 Fabrication for the help with the footrests. Super happy with how they turned out. Was fun to turn these with Richard, and I always have fun at the lathe. So anyways, that's going to wrap it up for this one, guys. I am sure you will see these in many videos to come. And until next time, take care.